Man, let's talk about this thing that has haunted human beings since the beginning of time, the meaning of life. What the hell are we doing here? Why are we born? Why do we struggle? Why do we love? Why do we suffer? And why do we eventually die? I've had so many people sit across from me, scientists, philosophers, monks, fighters, musicians, spiritual gurus, and all of them wrestle with this same damn question. And what I've noticed is everyone's got a piece of the puzzle. Science gives you one part, philosophy gives you another. Psychedelics open up this wild door, but none of them really give you the whole picture. And then I started digging into Islam, and man, it was like a light bulb went off. Now, don't get me wrong, like a lot of people, I grew up with a certain image of Islam. The media, politics, cultural stereotypes, they shape your perspective before you even know what you're talking about. But then you start actually reading, you start listening to Muslims who live this thing every single day. You open a Quran translation, and suddenly you're face to face with one of the clearest, most direct answers to the meaning of life you'll ever encounter. So here's the deal. In Islam, the purpose of life is simple but profound. You were created by God, Allah, to worship Him, to live righteously, and to prepare for the afterlife. That's it. That's the core. And at first that might sound too basic, like, come on, man, that's it. Just worship God. But when you start unpacking it, you realize it's not just about rituals or words, it's about a way of living that brings order, discipline, peace, and purpose to your entire existence. Think about how most of us live in the modern world. We're chasing stuff, money, followers, likes, recognition, comfort, pleasure, you name it. And even when we get those things, we're still left feeling empty. You buy the new car, you get the dream house, you even reach that career milestone, and a week later, you're scrolling on your phone, asking yourself, now what? Islam answers that, now what? With brutal clarity. Now you live for God. Now you dedicate your time, your energy, your love, your discipline to the one who created you. Because that's what you were made for. And when you realize that, suddenly all the chaos of life starts to make sense. One thing I found fascinating is how Islam views life as a test. That's a powerful concept. Every challenge you face, every temptation you fight, every blessing you enjoy, it's all part of the test. It's not random, it's not meaningless, it's not just luck or chaos, and that completely reframes suffering, man. Instead of just saying, why me, why this, you realize, okay, this is part of my test. How I respond to this is going to shape who I become and where I end up after I die. And death, that's the other part we avoid talking about in our culture. We pretend like we're going to live forever. We distract ourselves with entertainment, with material stuff, with noise, because deep down we're terrified of the end. But Islam stares death in the face and says, this isn't the end, this is the beginning of the real journey. That's a game changer. If you live like you're preparing for eternity, suddenly your choices, your struggles, your sacrifices, they all matter infinitely more. Now let's talk discipline. One of the things that struck me is prayer in Islam. 5 times a day, every day, no matter what. Dude, imagine that. Imagine how grounded your life becomes if you stop 5 times to reconnect with God, to realign your intentions, to remind yourself what the point is. Neuroscientists today will tell you that rituals, meditation, and mindfulness practices rewire your brain, reduce stress, and improve focus. Islam had that baked into its system 1400 years ago. That's not coincidence, that's wisdom. And then you've got fasting during Ramadan. Man, if you've ever tried intermittent fasting, you know how powerful it is. But in Islam, fasting isn't just about health. It's about controlling your desires, building patience, and cultivating empathy for people who don't have enough to eat. It's about becoming a stronger, more disciplined version of yourself, while also becoming more compassionate. That's meaning. That's growth. Another thing that really stood out to me is charity zakat. You're obligated to give a percentage of your wealth to people in need. Think about how society would change if everyone did that. Instead of greed being the engine of everything, generosity becomes part of the culture. That's meaning on a societal level. And here's the kicker. Islam doesn't just give you philosophy, it gives you structure. It gives you daily practices, community, discipline, and a worldview that ties everything together. That's What makes it different from just reading a self-help book or listening to a motivational speech? It's a complete way of life. So here's where I'm at. When you start exploring Islam, you realize that the meaning of life isn't something you just figure out in your head. It's something you live. It's something you embody through discipline, kindness, worship, community, and constant. It's not about inventing your own purpose. It's about aligning with the purpose you were created for. And that, man, is profound. All right, so we've dug into how Islam gives you this crystal clear purpose. You're here to worship God, live righteously, and prepare for eternity. But let's push deeper into how that actually plays out and why it resonates so much when you compare it to the confusion we see all around us today. First thing, prayer. Man, I can't get over how powerful that is. Stopping 5 times a day to realign with your creator. Think about your average person in the West. They wake up, grab their phone, scroll through chaos, maybe grab a coffee, rush to work, stress out all day, maybe hit the gym if they're disciplined, and crash in front of Netflix. And they repeat. It's like sleepwalking through life. There's no pause button, no moment to ask, am I even on the right path? Now picture a Muslim's day. They stop, they wash up, they put their face on the ground, and they literally say, God, you are greater. That's a reset button every couple of hours. You can't live in autopilot if you're doing that. Your entire day gets reframed around, meaning not just survival and community. Man, community is everything. One of the loneliest things about modern life is how individualistic we've become. Everyone's siloed, everyone's stuck in their own bubble. We're more connected online, but more disconnected in reality. Islam smashes that wall down. You're praying in congregation, you're fasting with your neighbors, you're breaking bread together, you're celebrating together. You're constantly reminded that you're not just an individual, you're part of a greater body that feeds a deep human need we've lost sight of. Then there's zakat, mandatory charity. And I love this concept because it's not option. It's not, hey, if you're feeling generous, throw a couple bucks into a jar. It's if you've been blessed with wealth, you owe it to the community to redistribute some of it. That blows my mind because it hardwires generosity into the system. Imagine if corporations or billionaires in our culture had to do that. Not for tax write-offs, not for PR, but because it was literally their duty as human beings. Think about the poverty, the inequality, the despair that could be wiped out. That's meaning applied to economic. Now let's go into the afterlife, because this is where Islam really shifts your mindset. If you live like death is the end, you're either terrified of it or you ignore it and just distract yourself. That's why you see people numb themselves with drugs, alcohol, endless entertainment, anything to avoid thinking about the fact that they're going to die. But Islam reframes death as a doorway. It says, this life is the test, the next life is the result. And that's heaven. That means every little thing you do matters. Every word, every action, every thought, every choice, it all gets recorded. No one cheats the system. No one gets away with evil. No good deed is wasted. Justice might not happen here, but it will happen there. That gives meaning to suffering. That gives meaning to patience. That gives meaning to sacrifice. And when you think about it from a psychological perspective, man, that's freeing. Because one of the things that eats people alive is the idea of unfairness. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do evil people get away with stuff? In Islam, those questions have an answer. This isn't the final scoreboard. This is just the warm-up. The real game, the real justice is waiting. That gives you hope, it gives you patience, and it keeps you steady even when the world feels like it's falling apart. Now let me bring this back to my own lens. I've talked to scientists who'll say, we're just stardust, just random accidents of evolution. Yeah, that's poetic, but it doesn't tell you how to live. I've talked to psychedelic explorers who'll say the meaning of life is to dissolve your ego and become one with the universe. And okay, that's trippy, but how do you live that day? Islam is different, because it doesn't just give you an abstract idea. It gives you a system, a lifestyle. It says, here's the meaning, here's the method, here's the reward. And maybe that's why we're seeing so many people in the West embracing Islam. Because they're tired, man. Tired of emptiness. Tired of distraction. Tired of trying to invent meaning from scratch. They want clarity. They want structure. They want a worldview that answers the deepest questions without making them chase their tail in circles. So here's where I land on this. Discovering the meaning of life through Islam isn't about throwing away your brain. It's about aligning your existence with something higher than yourself. It's about grounding yourself in discipline, compassion, community, and faith in a world that constantly pulls you towards selfishness, chaos, and despair. And honestly, I think that's what we're all looking for, whether we admit it or not. Meaning, purpose, a roadmap. Islam just happens to provide one of the clearest, most powerful versions of that roadmap I've ever come across. So maybe the meaning of life isn't this endless mystery we're supposed to figure out on our own. Maybe it's already been revealed. Maybe it's sitting there in plain sight, waiting for us to stop distracting ourselves long enough to see it.